There are 6 verses in the Bible that pastors rarely preach, 6 verses that sit at the hinge of Genesis, between the genealogies and the flood, and that read, if you slow down and take them literally, like the opening of a very different kind of story. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. There were giants in the earth in those days. Who were the sons of God? Who were the giants? And why, in the very next breath, does God announce that He will destroy all flesh? Every Sunday school lesson slides past this. The flood becomes a story about generic human wickedness, an ark and a rainbow. But the text itself places these 6 strange verses directly before the waters, as if they were the reason, as if something happened on the earth that could not be fixed, only washed away. The earliest readers of Genesis believed exactly that. The oldest Jewish and Christian interpreters, the translators of the Septuagint, the historian Josephus, the Dead Sea community, the first church fathers, read these verses as the record of a catastrophe from above, heavenly beings crossing a forbidden line and the world breaking under the weight of what they made. 2 entire books preserved outside your Bible, the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, both kept as scripture by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, exist largely to tell this story in full. Tonight, we put the pieces together: Genesis, Enoch, Jubilees, and the New Testament verses that quietly confirm the whole affair. Before we begin, our standing promise. Where the Bible speaks, we quote it. Where the lost books speak, we name them. And where interpreters disagree, and here they have disagreed for 2,000 years, we will tell you honestly. Judge it for yourself. This is the real story of Genesis chapter 6. Open your Bible to Genesis chapter 6 and read the opening verses slowly, as if for the first time. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Then the verse that has launched 1,000 debates. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. And immediately, the verdict. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth. 3 mysteries stare at us from this page. First, who are the sons of God? The Hebrew phrase is Bene ha-Elohim, and everywhere else it appears in the Hebrew Bible, in Job, in the Psalms, it means one thing only: heavenly beings, the members of God's divine council, angels. Job uses the exact phrase for the beings who presented themselves before the Lord, with the Satan among them. Second, who are the giants? The Hebrew word is Nephilim, from a root meaning to fall, the fallen ones. When the ancient Greek translators of the Septuagint reached this word, they chose gigantes, giants, the same word Greek myth used for the monstrous children born of gods and earth. Whatever the Nephilim were, the oldest translators wanted their readers to shudder. And third, the quietest mystery of all. Why is this here? 6 verses, with no explanation, no commentary, no comfort, placed like a black stone at the entrance to the flood story. The narrative logic is unmistakable. This happened, and then the world ended. Genesis gives us the crime scene, but not the case file. It reads like the surviving summary of a much longer story, as if the full account existed somewhere else, and the author of Genesis assumed we knew it. Here is the remarkable thing. The ancient world did know it, and 2 of the books that told it never stopped being scripture. A plateau in East Africa made sure of that. Before we open the lost books, you deserve to know the state of the argument, because how you read 6 verses in Genesis turns out to be one of the oldest interpretive battles in existence. The oldest reading is the supernatural one. The sons of God are heavenly beings. Their crossing with human women was a violation of the created order. The Nephilim were the result. This is how the Septuagint translated it in the 3rd century before Christ. It is how the historian Josephus told it to his Roman readers, comparing the deeds of the giants, in his words, to those of the Titans. It is how Philo of Alexandria read it, how the Dead Sea community read it, and how virtually every Christian writer of the first 3 centuries read it. Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Athenagoras, Tertullian, Clement. For the early church, this was not a fringe theory. It was simply what Genesis 6 meant. Then, in the 4th and 5th centuries, the tide turned. Augustine, the most influential theologian in Western history, argued for a safer reading. The sons of God were merely the righteous line of Seth, and the daughters of men the corrupt line of Cain. Godly men marrying ungodly women, a story about mixed marriage, not fallen angels. No monsters, no cosmic crime. Augustine's reading conquered the West, and for 1,000 years the angels quietly left the sermon. Why the retreat? The reasons were understandable. Jesus had said the angels in heaven neither marry nor are given in marriage. How then could angels father children? The angelic reading also leaned on the Book of Enoch, and as we saw in our first documentary, the church was in the process of pushing Enoch out of the canon. Guilt by association ran in both directions. But here is what honest scholarship says today, and it may surprise you. The majority of modern academic commentators, including many conservative ones, have returned to the oldest reading. The Hebrew phrase means divine beings everywhere else it occurs. The Sethite theory requires the text to change the meaning of men twice in a single sentence. And the New Testament itself, as we will see, appears to side with the angels. So hold both readings in your hands if you wish. But for the rest of this story, we will follow the oldest one. The one the first readers of Genesis followed, and the one the lost books preserve in overwhelming detail. Because if the sons of God were watchers, then Genesis 6 is not a footnote, it is a war report. The Book of Enoch opens the case file that Genesis sealed. We told the story of the book itself in our first documentary, how it was quoted in the New Testament, buried at Qumran, and preserved only in Ethiopia. Tonight we need its testimony, because Enoch does not say the sons of God and move on. It gives a number, a place, a leader, and a pact. The number? 200. Not a horde, a unit. 200 watchers, angels appointed to observe the human race, who together conceived a desire they knew was forbidden. The place? The summit of Mount Hermon, the highest peak of the region, standing to this day on the borders of Lebanon and Syria, snow-crowned above the sources of the Jordan. The leader, Semjaza, and the text preserves his hesitation, the oldest recorded cold feet in history. I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And the pact? His solution was to spread the guilt. Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, rakiuld, a curse on any who turned back. 200 beings swore together on the mountain and named it Hermon after the oath that damned them. Heaven's first conspiracy, organized precisely like a human one, with a nervous ringleader and a pact to keep anyone from talking. Enoch even lists the chiefs of 10, Semjaza, Azazel, Arakiel, Kokabeel, Brachijal, and the rest, names that read like a fallen order of battle. And note what the sin actually was. Not pride, not rebellion for a throne. The watchers fell for something almost embarrassingly recognizable. Desire, for touch, for family, for a stake in the mortal world they were only meant to guard. The Book of Enoch's devil story is not Milton's. It is closer to a police file, officials with a duty, a temptation, a conspiracy, and a cover-up. They descended in the days of Jared, the text says, and the world's countdown began. The watchers arrived with 2 gifts, and both were catastrophic. The first gift was knowledge. Azazel taught the making of swords and shields, the working of metals, the crafting of ornaments and cosmetics, the arts of war and vanity in one breath. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cutting. Others, astrology and the reading of clouds and stars. Forbidden curriculum delivered out of season by teachers with no permission to teach. And the text's verdict is a single line: "As men perished, they cried, and their cry went up to heaven." The second gift grew in the wombs of their wives. The children of the Watchers were the Nephilim, the giants of Genesis 6, and the lost books describe their rise as a threefold plague. First, the giants consumed everything human labor could produce. Then, when men could no longer feed them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And at last they turned on the creatures and on each other, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. The Book of Jubilees, our witness from the last documentary, adds a detail with the cold precision of a chronicle. The giants themselves splintered into warring kinds and slew one another. The Nephil slew the Nephilim, and the Nephilim slew the Eljo, and the Eljo mankind. A food chain of violence with humanity at the bottom. And then Jubilees adds the strangest, saddest note of all. The corruption did not stop with men. All flesh corrupted its way. The text of Genesis says exactly this, and Jubilees takes it literally. Even the animals had been ruined. All flesh, from men to cattle, and to beasts and to birds. Whatever the Watchers unleashed, the violence, the appetite, the breaking of kinds, it reached down through the whole order of nature. The world was that merely wicked, because as a question, it was contaminated down to the complaise. When the earth itself, the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. When the ground you walk on, down to the birds. Tucked inside Genesis 6 is a verse that most readers pass without seeing what it says. And the Lord said, "My spirit shall not always strive with man, yet his days shall be 120 years. 120 years of what? Some read it as the new human lifespan, but people in Genesis go on living far longer for many generations afterward. The numbers refuse to cooperate. The older reading, the one the ancient interpreters preferred, is darker and more merciful at once. It was a deadline, 120 years of warning before the waters, a countdown publicly announced, which transforms the story of Noah. He was not building a boat in private eccentricity. He was, as the New Testament calls him, a preacher of righteousness, working through a century-long grace period while the world ignored him. The flood in this reading was not an ambush. It was the most heavily announced judgment in history. 120 years between the verdict and the rain, in case anyone wished to turn. The lost books sharpen the same point from heaven's side. When the cries of the earth rose up, it was the four great archangels, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, Gabriel, who carried the case to the throne. And the answer came down as a series of commands we walked through in our first documentary. Uriel to warn Noah, Raphael to bind Azazel in the desert pit of Dudael, Gabriel to set the giants against each other, Michael to chain Semjaza and his companions in the valleys of the earth for 70 generations until the day of their judgment. Notice what this means. Long before the first raindrop, the war was already over. The teachers were in chains, the giants had been turned on one another. The flood did not defeat the Watchers, heaven's angels did that. The waters came for what remained, a world too broken to heal. The rain, in the oldest reading, was not the weapon, it was the cleanup. Before we leave the days before the flood, there is one more lost book to open, and it may be the strangest of them all, because this one tells the story from inside the monsters. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, scattered across several caves, archaeologists found the shredded remains of a work scholars now call the Book of Giants. It belongs to the Enoch tradition. Same world, same Watchers, but its point of view is unlike anything else in ancient religion. It follows the giants themselves, their conversations, their quarrels, their fear. In its surviving fragments, two giant brothers take center stage, Ochia and Hahia, sons of Semjaza himself. And the drama that grips them is not battle, it is dreams. Night after night, the giants begin to dream, and the dreams are all wrong. One sees a garden of 200 trees, count the number, from which a flood of water rises and fire consumes what remains. Another sees a stone tablet covered with names being plunged under water until every name but a handful is washed away. The giants wake in terror and do something almost touchingly human. They convene a council to argue about what the dreams mean. And when they cannot agree, they send a messenger, a giant named Mahwe, who in the fragments travels across the deserts on wings to find the one being who can interpret dreams, Enoch, the scribe. The monsters of Genesis 6, terrified by their own nightmares, sending an envoy to the man of God to ask, "Are we going to die?" Enoch's answer, carried back across the desert, is the sentence we already know. The names on the tablet will be washed away. Judgment is coming, no appeal. And one fragment holds a detail that has delighted scholars since the day it was read. Among the giants appears a name you know, Gilgamesh, the hero of Babylon's great epic, drafted into the Hebrew imagination as one of the doomed sons of the Watchers. One civilization's greatest hero, filed by another as a monster awaiting the flood. Ancient literature holds few stranger crossovers. Honesty note, as always, the Book of Giants survives only in fragments from Qumran and, remarkably, from Manichaean texts found 5,000 kilometers away along the Silk Road, where the story traveled for 1,000 years. No church canonized it, not even Ethiopia. But it proves something important. The world of Genesis 6 was once so vivid, so widely told, that even the giants got their own book, and even the giants in it were afraid. In all of this, one group has stood silent at the center of the story, the women. Genesis gives them 4 words, the daughters of men, and no voice at all. They are seen, chosen, taken. The lost books do only a little better, but what they preserve is worth hearing because it changes the shape of the crime. The Book of Enoch says the Watchers did not only take the women, they taught them. They taught them charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. The forbidden curriculum was shared: medicine, herb lore, incantation. In the world of the text, this is corruption. But listen with modern ears and you hear something else too. The memory of women as the first keepers of pharmacology and healing craft. A memory so old the ancient author could only explain it as angelic. Jubilees adds the human cost. When the judgment fell, the text says the Watchers' wives were not spared the sight of it. The mothers of the giants watched their sons cut each other down under Gabriel's sentence. The punishment designed with terrible precision to be witnessed by the fathers. The women stood in the blast radius of a crime they had not conceived, and one uncanny verse in Enoch assigns them a fate that echoes far beyond the Bible. Speaking of the women who had been with the fallen angels, the text says, the women also of the angels who went astray shall become sirens. Sirens, the luring voices of the sea. Whether the translator reached for a Greek word to name a Hebrew ghost, or the traditions truly touched, there it stands, the Bible's lost books and Homer's monsters, meeting in a single line. Why does this matter tonight? Because it completes the pattern we have seen all along. Every party to the crossing was unmade by it. The Watchers lost heaven, the giants lost their bodies, and the daughters of men, the only ones who never swore an oath on any mountain, lost their names, their sons, and finally, in the tradition's imagination, their humanity. Genesis 6 is often told as a story about angels. Read closely. It is also the Bible's first story about what powerful beings do to powerless women. And the lost books, at least, remembered that the women were there. If all of this lived only in the lost books, you could file it under ancient imagination. But here is where the story becomes uncomfortable for the tidy view. Because the New Testament, the Bible in your hands, refers to these events. Not once, 3 times. Listen to the second letter of Peter. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness, to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, angels who sinned, chains of darkness, and in the very next clause, the flood of Noah. The same sequence as Enoch, angelic sin, imprisonment, deluge. And there is a detail in the Greek that your translation hides. The word rendered, cast them down to hell, is not the usual word at all. It is tartarou, a verb that exists nowhere else in the entire Bible, meaning to cast into Tartarus. Tartarus, the abyss of Greek myth, the prison beneath the world where Zeus chained the Titans. Peter, writing to a Greek-speaking world, reached past his own vocabulary to name the one place his readers associated with imprisoned giants and fallen powers. It is as if the text winked, yes, that kind of prison, that kind of prisoner. The letter of Jude goes further. The angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains. Left their own habitation. The exact crime of the watchers, abandoning their appointed station for the earth. And Jude, as we have seen, then quotes the Book of Enoch by name, calling him the 7th from Adam. Even the strange verse in 1 Peter, Christ preaching unto the spirits in prison, which sometime were disobedient in the days of Noah, locates a population of imprisoned spirits and dates their crime precisely to the flood generation. Honesty requires the caveat. Each of these passages has alternative interpretations, and theologians have argued them for centuries. But the pattern is difficult to unsee. The apostolic generation, reading Genesis 6, appears to have read it the old way, the Enochian way, the chains, the darkness, the flood, the whole architecture of the Watcher's story standing quietly inside the canon itself. And then the rain. But even here, at the story everyone knows, the lost books add what Genesis leaves out, beginning with a date you have heard before. The Book of Jubilees, keeper of heaven's calendar, records the day the flood began with bureaucratic precision. The second month, the 17th day. If you watched our last documentary, that date should raise the hair on your arms. It is the very date Jubilees gives for the fall in Eden, the day the gate closed and the animals fell silent. Heaven's calendar, keeping its appointments. On the anniversary of the first breaking of the world was broken again, this time by water. Jubilees describes the mechanism with both hands. The fountains of the great deep were opened, and the windows of heaven. Water from below and above at once, creation's boundaries failing in both directions. The ancient reader would have understood the horror precisely. In Genesis chapter 1, God's great work was separation. Waters above divided from waters below, sea walled off from land. The flood is creation run backward, the dividing walls removed, the world returned deliberately to the formless deep it came from. For 5 months the waters prevailed, and the ark, Jubilees tells us, came to rest not vaguely on the mountains of Ararat, but on a named summit, Lubar, one of the peaks of Ararat. A mountain the book returns to again and again, for on its slopes Noah would plant his vineyard, and on its slopes he would one day be buried. The lost books are like this everywhere. Where Genesis paints in washes, they draw in ink, dates, names, places, as if daring you to check. And when Noah finally stood on drowned earth and built his altar, Jubilees adds the detail that closes tonight's story like a key turning in a lock. Noah's sacrifice, it says, was offered to make atonement for the land. Not for himself, not for his family, for the land. Because in the theology of the lost books, the ground itself had been defiled by blood, by giants, by everything the Watchers loosed upon it, and the earth that had cried out for justice now needed cleansing to be habitable again. The flood, in this telling, was never really about drowning the wicked. It was about washing the crime scene. And the first act of the new world was not a celebration. It was a purification, performed by the one household that remembered what the water had come to erase. Now we reach the question this story answers that nothing else in the Bible quite does. Where do demons come from? Think about it. The Old Testament opens with no demons to speak of. By the Gospels, the land is full of them. Unclean spirits, begging, possessing, speaking. The Bible never pauses to explain where this population originated, but the lost books do, and their answer connects everything we have seen tonight. When the giants died, slaughtered by each other under Gabriel's sentence and drowned in the flood, something of them did not die. The Book of Enoch states it with terrible simplicity. And now the giants, who are produced from the spirits and flesh, shall be called evil spirits upon the earth. Because they are born from men and from the holy watchers, evil spirits have proceeded from their bodies. Half heavenly, half human, the giants belonged to neither world, and so their spirits were left stranded in this one, disembodied, restless, and, the text adds, hungry in a way that explains their behavior ever after. These spirits shall rise up against the children of men. They take no food, but nevertheless hunger and thirst. Spirits who lost their bodies and crave them still. Read the Gospel accounts of possession again with that sentence in mind. Spirits that beg not to be sent away. Spirits that would rather enter a herd of swine than be unhoused. The lost books hand you an explanation the canon never spells out. The demons seek bodies because they remember having them. Jubilees completes the picture with the scene we met in our second documentary. After the flood, the demons led Noah's grandchildren astray until 9/10 of them were bound, and 1/10 was left, by permission, under the Prince Mastema to test mankind until the judgment. A remnant plague operating on a license. Is this doctrine? No, and we will say so plainly. No church council ever canonized this account of demon origins. But it was the working theory of the world the New Testament was written in. Justin Martyr and Athenagoras repeat it as common knowledge. When the first Christians met an unclean spirit, this is the family tree they assumed behind it. Watchers, then giants, then ghosts of giants, the orphaned appetites of Genesis 6. Still walking the earth it ruined. One phrase in Genesis 6 has troubled careful readers for millennia. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. After that? After the flood that destroyed all flesh? Whoever wrote Genesis knew what every reader of the Hebrew Bible discovers a few books later. The giants come back. When Moses sends 12 spies into Canaan, they return trembling. There we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, which come of the Nephilim, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers. The same word, the Anakim, the Rephaim, Og, king of Bashan, with his iron bed 9 cubits long. The conquest narratives are haunted by oversized men, remnants of something older. And at the end of the line stands the most famous of them all, a champion from Gath named Goliath, from a city where, the text notes, a remnant of the Anakim had survived. How, if the flood ended them? The ancient answers split. Some traditions said the corruption recurred, that the same crossing happened again on a smaller scale. Others pointed to the text's own loophole. The flood destroyed the giants' bodies, but the spirits remained, and the appetite for corruption with them. And some modern scholars read the phrase as the author's honest acknowledgement of the world he lived in, an ancient Near East whose landscape was littered with megalithic ruins and legends of mighty men, which the Bible reframes as the debris of judgment. We will not pretend to settle it. What matters is what the text does with the giants after the flood. It makes them the enemies of the promise. Israel's road into Canaan runs through Anakim country. David's kingship begins at the feet of a fallen giant. The Bible's story arc quietly rhymes, the seed of the watchers against the seed of the promise, from Hermon to the valley of Elah, where a shepherd boy with a sling ends the line of the mighty with a single stone. The first readers caught the rhyme. It is one more reason they told the Genesis 6 story the old way. It made the whole Bible hang together, from the oath on the mountain to the stone in Goliath's brow. So why did the church walk away from all of this? We have met the pieces of the answer across 3 documentaries. Tonight, they assemble. Augustine offered a reading with no scandal in it, at the very moment the church wanted the Book of Enoch gone. And the 2 decisions reinforced each other. A Genesis 6 without angels needs no Enoch. A canon without Enoch makes the angelic reading harder to defend. Add the theological worry, Jesus' word that heaven's angels do not marry, and the Sethite interpretations swept the field. Though notice, as many scholars have, what Jesus actually said. The angels in heaven do not marry. The Watchers' whole crime in the old reading was that they refused to stay there. There were also, frankly, matters of taste. The story is grotesque. Giants who devour, angels in chains beneath the hills, demons as the ghosts of drowned monsters. This is not the furniture of a respectable pulpit. As Christianity became the religion of empire, Genesis 6, the horror story, became Genesis 6, the marriage lesson. But the old reading never died. It survived in Ethiopia, where Enoch and Jubilees remained scripture and the Watchers remained history. It survived in the East, in writers the West forgot. And in the last century, with Enoch translated, Qumran opened, and the Hebrew text studied afresh, it walked back into the mainstream of scholarship, where it now, remarkably, holds the majority once again. 2,000 years, full circle. The verses never changed, only our willingness to read them. 6 verses, a mountain, an oath, a generation of monsters, a century of warning, and a world washed clean. However, you finally read Genesis chapter 6, angels or Sethites, history or warning, one thing is beyond argument. The Bible's flood is not a children's story about animals in a boat. It is the aftermath of the strangest chapter in the ancient world's memory, and the books that told it in full were kept alive for you by a church on a mountain plateau that refused to forget. The story is not over. The Watchers are. By every account we have read tonight, still where the archangels left them, in the valleys of darkness, waiting for a judgment that has not yet come. And their story raises the question our next documentary will answer. When a human being dies, where do they wait? The Book of Enoch saw that country too, the chambers of the dead, the mountain of souls, and what it saw will change how you picture everything between death and judgment. That is the next scroll we open. Subscribe if you want the scrolls as they open, and until then, walk well.